Hello Internet, welcome to the channel. My name's Frankie and today we are returning to Primate Isles, and last week we built on this exact zoo. We built for the red-ruffed lemur, our latest of the primates to join the zoo, and today we're going to be building for one of the more in-between species, and that of course means it is a non-primate animal to kind of fill the gaps so that not every single habitat is exactly the same. And we're going to be building for one of my top 5 favourite animals of all time, and that is the incredibly scary, let's be honest, cassowary. The first thing that I did when building this habitat was of course decide on the placement, and at this point in time there is a massive gap just behind the staff facilities that we built a while ago that desperately needs filling, because at the moment it's just a really big void in the middle of the zoo and it doesn't look the nicest. So with that I'm going to build a little offshoot of path to make sure that the main paths don't get too crowded when people are viewing this animal, and then start to create kind of a bridge. A walkway that passes above the heads of the animals and through the habitat is something that I've been wanting to do for a little while now, ever since my visit to the Cotswolds Wildlife Park and we got to walk through the wolf habitat. It was such an immersive experience and I think it would be wonderful to be able to recreate that for our guests. So what I'm going to do is create a raised path that comes off the viewing gallery for the Bornean orangutan and the Lar gibbon habitat, and then I'm going to just try and make it meet where we just laid out a path beforehand for the main viewing gallery for this habitat. I want to make sure that this path is kind of straight, so I'm putting the angle snap on to ensure that we have a nice right angle in the corner piece of this raised viewing gallery walkway kind of area, and that is just to try and, it's kind of for my benefit. Because I want to create a nice kind of canopy to it, I want to have an area with a roof. We're going to create our own custom fence and stuff. So in order to make the building process a bit easier when it comes to that stage, I want to make sure that the path itself is actually straight. Because otherwise it can be a little bit difficult to work with wood and stuff when you're working around curved edges and stuff. So that's why I went for straight building pieces when creating the path. Now for the main barrier I'm just going to use chain link fence, and the reason for that is 1, it is secure enough, and 2, I'm going to fill this habitat so thick with shrubbery and just foliage in general that you're not going to be able to see through that clearly. The main purpose of this habitat is to create a really immersive tropical jungle kind of feel for these cassowaries. They naturally do live in really dense forests and sometimes mangrove swamps and stuff, so the idea behind this habitat is to try and mimic that as best as possible, and we're going to have a really thick undergrowth that you're really not going to be able to see the cassowaries that easily unless you're using the walkthrough that allows you to go over the top of the habitat or the designated viewing gallery. Anywhere else we're going to have such thick plant life that it's going to be quite difficult to see through the fencing, even though it is only chain link fence. And as I just said about with the mangrove kind of element, I'm going to ensure that this habitat has a lot of water. We're going to create a few different pouches of water. It's going to kind of look like a really tropical swamp by the end of this. So that is, okay, that's an issue. That fiery turbine is definitely an issue. We will sort that out. So that is my main kind of focus here, to really drive home this tropical mangrove feeling. And whilst we're doing all of these little bits and bobs, I need to set my mechanics to work, not only fixing that turbine because that's a disgrace, but also doing some research and unlocking the Australian theme, because this is of course our first animal from the Australian pack, and I want to be able to use some of the Australian building pieces as well. Now I have, at this point of recording, looked through all the building pieces and blueprints and stuff, and I've got to say I am absolutely in love with this pack. The building pieces are gorgeous. I love all of the bleached pieces of wood. It's all like sun bleached. I love all the carbon fiber construction pieces. It's just, it just oozes like renewable, if you know what I mean. Everything looks like it's been recycled. It just looks wonderful. And I'm also a really big fan of all the Australian animals that we have in the game. Not only did we get a bunch with this pack, but we already had the wombat and the emu. We had the platypus as well as the wallabies. So we already have quite a diverse range already of Australia specific animals that are indigenous to Australia and kind of nowhere else. So I think we've got a really good foundation for creating a Australian themed zoo. Of course, I want to build for the koalas because they're just adorable. So if you think this is a good idea, let me know in the comments down below, because I would love to do an Australian mini zoo that we can add to when we eventually get the kiwi and other animals that might come from Australia. Now there are of course some that just don't only come from Australia, like the saltwater crocodile. That can also be put in there. There are plenty of animals like that as well to really kind of round out that zoo, and I think it would be a really fun project. So please let me know in the comments if you would like to see that on the channel. What you see me doing now is laying a bit of a foundation for some, let's call it, variety and texture. I love to put these rocky outcrops by the edge of waterways, just because it does add that variety in texture. Otherwise it's going to be really flat. I don't want to add hills and stuff to this habitat, but by adding these you are adding a variety of elevation as well, and it's just a really good way to kind of break up what you're looking at. Already it looks a lot more interesting by having these rocky outcrops. Now we're going to start placing trees. To begin with, we're going to go with a bunch of mangrove trees, and we're going to focus those obviously around the edge of the water areas, because that is where they would naturally grow. And we are going to focus some, like the rest of the trees and stuff, around the edge of the habitat, and then we're going to go with a bunch of bushes as well. And we're going to do my kind of fairly common trick that I do on the channel of creating a sort of stamp, which we can use for ground coverage. So what I do is I select a bunch of smaller ground level plants that I'm quite happy with, and create a sort of template that I can then copy and paste around the entire habitat to quickly cover the ground area, because it can be very monotonous, very repetitive to just keep going around adding individual plants. So creating a little template for yourself that you can copy and paste around everywhere speeds that process up massively. And you might be thinking, but then it looks very samey, and that's true. What I do to remedy that is I come in afterwards with some larger plants like the ferns and stuff, and I just whack those sporadically across the habitat. It really helps to break up the very repetitive nature of using that template that we have already used. So it introduces a bit more interest for us again, and that is kind of my main thought process behind adding loads of plants. Now I'm going to take a brief break from talking and just let you enjoy the utter shambles that is me just piling plants on top of plants to create such a lush, dense looking forest habitat. Floki will pop up to give you your fact about the cassowary, and I think it's actually quite an interesting one this time, and then we'll be back to start talking about the walkway that's going over the top of this habitat. The first of the building pieces we're going to use from the Australia pack is the educational Zoopedia frame. I really like this. It just feels very Aboriginal, which is pretty cool, and it's just going to add a little bit more personality to our education boards for this particular habitat. All I'm going to do is pop them onto the side of the chain link fence, nothing too fancy, and then sink the education board ever so slightly behind the frame, as I don't really like it sitting on a surface. I do like it to be recessed. I just think it looks a lot better, and this is just a really easy way to add a little bit more interest to your education boards, because they can look a little bit stale when just propped on the legs that they sometimes come with. I think this is a really nice way of making them just look a little bit more integrated to the zoo as well, because they're kind of carrying on a bit of theming. I think it looks really nice and I'm quite happy with it, so let's move on to the walkway. Now, this walkway through the cassowary habitat is a classic example of me just overcomplicating something for myself and making it far more difficult than it needs to be. Now, in order to build it, what I did was I used some East Asian water wheel spur pieces, and they're going to act as the legs for this raised area, and they're also going to extend up into the covering when we add a little roof, which won't go all the way around. The canopy is going to be in the center of the really long part of this walkway, and all I'm going to be doing is copy and pasting these along. But using the building tools and stuff, the advanced move tools, I was getting pretty frustrated, I'm not going to lie. It did get needlessly complicated, but eventually we did get there. And then when the support structures are in, we're going to use some Australian planks, these lovely sun-bleached pieces of wood, and they're going to bridge the gaps in between each of these dark wooden pieces. And then to fill in the gaps to make sure that no one's shoe falls into this habitat, we're going to use some tiny pieces of wood, just tiny little planks to fill that space kind of. And it's a repetitive process. It's quite a boring one as well, to be honest, but it has a really nice finished result. It's one of those kind of cases where the effort kind of shows. It may feel at the time like kind of a pain to be doing that much work, but once it's done, it's worth it, so I'm kind of happy with it. Now, I would like you to bear in mind that I have sped up and cut out a fair bit of footage when building this walkway, because it did take nearly an hour, and I think it's pretty boring to watch. Like I said, it was worth all the effort in the end, but it's not very entertaining at all, so just bear in mind that it's not as quick as it looks on screen. Now, building the canopy area was ultimately quite a bit simpler. What I do is I select all of the beams that I want to be higher and then simply raise them up into the sky a little bit, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing with the Australian planks. I'm going to raise them up into the air and use them to bridge the gaps in between the planks, because that is going to create a bit of a support system for the roof. And once they've been copy and pasted along and we've got some perimeter pieces in place as well, we could start to place the actual roof pieces on top. And I'm just going to use some of the roof pieces on the grid. We're going to use the corrugated iron roof from the Australia pack. I really like how aged and weathered this looks. It looks like it's been here for a long time. It's started to go rusty and stuff. It's seen a lot of rain and whatnot. And I think it really lends itself to this really quite naturalistic looking habitat that we've already built. So I'm really happy with this roof, and again, it's just making me want to build these pieces even more and go for a deserty kind of Australian zoo. But you know, that's for another video. Now we're going to add another education board, but this time on the walkway, and we're going to go for something a bit more rustic looking. We're going to be using another of the Australian Education Zoopedia board kind of frames, but this time it looks like it's made out of some scrap metal and planks of wood, and it blends into this walkway perfectly, so that's why I've chosen to use that one. We're also going to place some bins and a couple of the donation bins as well on that walkway to ensure that our guests can actually donate for the cassowaries, because they are such beautiful creatures. I'm also going to add a couple of the education boards on the walkway that goes behind this habitat, as you can technically see into it, so it kind of makes sense to have the boards up there as well. The last thing that I want to do for this build is fill in this space that we created earlier when creating the offshoot of path, and all I'm going to do is create a lovely nature scene. We're going to use a couple rocks to begin with to kind of give us a focal point, and then we're going to use some of the massive rhubarb plants. among other plants, to create a very natural looking area, and I'm making sure that all the plants are from the tropical biome in Africa because that is where the zoo is set, so I want to make sure that we are using local plants when decorating areas like this. Now, on top of these massive rocks, I think it'd be a good opportunity to place one of the Australian themed statues of the cassowary, which looks like it's made out of wood and then painted rather nicely in that lovely rustic looking hand done kind of painting style that is clearly derived from Aboriginal artwork and stuff that you'd often see on boomerangs and whatnot. I think it works really well. So I'm really happy with this statue. I think it looks really cool, especially as it isn't too bright and it doesn't kind of jump out too much. It goes with this nature scene really well, opposed to if I were to put one of the like golden reward statues up there. That might look a little strange, but having this wooden statue that has been kind of clearly hand painted, I think it suits this area really nicely. So with these finishing touches, we are indeed done for this habitat. I am really happy with this one. I am in love with this dense forested kind of look we got in the end for it. I really like that. I know that it doesn't really lend itself to guest visibility, but these are shy animals. They don't want to be interacting with humans all that much, so giving them this much shelter is kind of a bonus. Thank you so much for having watched this video. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment down below on what you'd like to see on the channel in the future. Make sure to subscribe, and until next time, I'll see you later.